This is a synagogue. And here's one too. And another. From the outside, they are not easily distinguishable, neither in terms of their size nor their shape. And yet, all these sacred places are connected by both a remarkable and tragic history going back more than 3,000 years. It is a story of the Jewish people who worship not only here on this holy ground, but in all four corners of the world. Very few of these sacred places have survived history. They reflect the historical trajectory of a people. In order to survive, they have had to appear discreet, almost invisible. On the island of Djerba in Tunisia, they echo the architectural plans of a mosque. In the Ghetto of Venice, like elsewhere, the modest exterior facades reveal nothing of their lavish interior. On the Iberian Peninsula, where the Inquisition managed to destroy practically all the synagogues, those who survived are exceptional. In Europe, the Second World War annihilated a major part of Jewish places of worship. The large synagogue of Budapest represents a rare example of those sacred places who survived. The Jews find refuge in the New World. There, a synagogue emerges, reflecting their newly found confidence and pride of becoming at last visible. At the crossroads of Asia, Africa, and Europe can be found the birthplace of the first monotheistic religion, Judaism. Here in Jerusalem, on Mount Moriah, the Jewish people build and then rebuild their temple. For the Jews, this site is the most sacred, the most evocative there is, believing that on earth, this is the place closest to God.
So the temple is built on Mount Moriah, and in this place stood first the first temple that was built according to the Bible by King Solomon in the 10th century BCE.
Orit Peleg Barkat has a doctorate in archaeology. Her research is on the temples of Jerusalem.
There is no archaeological remains from the first temple. So we have to rely on the historical sources. So most of the details that we have come from the Bible. And there we have quite a vague description, but with some details about the plan and the measurements of the temple.
According to the Hebrew Bible in ancient times, Jewish pilgrims had to venture 3 times a year to the Temple of Solomon to pray and offer animals for sacrifice to their God. Entering, they traversed immense courtyards, then offered their animals for sacrifice to the high priests, the Kohanim, since only they could perform this daily ritual on the sacrificial altar. The Kohanim were also in charge of lighting the large menorah. These candelabras reminded the pilgrims that they were entering the most sacred site in the temple, the Holy of Holies, which held the Holy Ark, containing the 10 Commandments given by God to Moses and his people on Mount Sinai. God also entrusted Moses with the Torah, containing all of his commandments, as well as the history of the Jews from its beginning. The Torah corresponds to the Old Testament. Since antiquity, Jews have gathered in synagogues to pray and study the Word of God. In synagogues, the Holy of Holies is represented by the Ark, where the Torah is carefully stored. And the sacrificial altar is symbolized by a lectern, where the sacred scrolls are read.
As a matter of fact, sacred for us is never architecture. There is one place which is sacred, and God defines it with no architectural measures. God says, this is the place that I choose to place my name in.
Rachel Elior is a professor of philosophy at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Her research interests concentrate on the history of Jewish thought and, in particular, Jewish mysticism.
There is no divine description on the nature of the temple, architecturally wise. It's only a place which is commemorated and sanctified by the very presence of God. That's the nature of the temple. A place where God is present, where heaven and earth meet, where the eternal and the mortal are touching each other in an unprecedented way, and in no other place in the world, only here in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount.
Following the turbulent history of the Jewish people, there remains today only one visible remnant from ancient times, the Kotel, wall in Hebrew.
For the Jewish people, the wall had been the icon of the whole entire biblical history in one place. This is the place where our forefathers and foremothers of antiquity have been praying, have been offering sacrifices, have been celebrating the presence of God in Jerusalem.
Judaism is a religion which is not fixated on images, statues, or objects, but rather is rooted in the power of memory, ideas, and words.
The sacredness is in the community. So the sanctity is not about a building. It's about the memory, about the ritual, about the text, about the teaching, and about the ongoing engagement of study and creativity.
A synagogue can be huge and richly decorated, as well as small and intimate. The word synagogue has its origins from the Greek, meaning gather, assemble. In Hebrew, they are called Bet Knesset, house of meetings, Bet Tefillah, house of prayers, and also Bet Midrash, house of teaching.
The synagogue could be in any place. It could be in a room, it could be in a house, it could be in a tent. Any place that these people are sitting together and studying could be a synagogue. The only requirement for a synagogue is the presence of the divine law.
Since 1967, there is a divided space reserved for women and for men on the western wall of the temple, the Kotel. This obligatory separation was not always apparent in the temple, but today it exists in many synagogues.
There were no part for the women in the synagogue. Only later, synagogue with places for women would be added. There is a debate among scholars if in ancient synagogues there would have been a place for women, but there is a debate and there is no one opinion about it. So women were not part of the liturgy, and they were not welcome to be part of the intellectual engagements or the ritual engagements. They had their own share, but not as part of the community of memory, because they were not taught to read and write. Only the men were taught to read and write.
Women and men pray in front of the Kotel, which is also called the Wailing Wall, in memory of the painful past of the temples of Jerusalem.
the Solomon's temple, was destroyed by the Babylonians in the 6th century BCE. And then a few decades after that, the Jews came back from Babylon and reestablished the temple.
In 20 BC, Herod, king of Judea, who is placed upon the throne a few years earlier by the Romans, oversees the rebuilding of the temple. His ambition? To create the largest, most beautiful building in all the world. It will take him nearly half a century to complete this gigantic project, resulting in the largest edifice built of its time. The Jewish community of Jerusalem was never able to properly worship in this sacred place. Very shortly after completing the building work, the first conflict between Romans and rebellious Jews erupts.
So in the year 70, the Roman soldiers managed to get inside the Temple Mount, where the rebels entrenched themselves. And in this war between the rebels and the soldiers, the temple caught fire, and then the temple was destroyed. But not only the temple, also the courts and the buildings surrounding the temple were destroyed. The destruction was not complete, but it was massive. And we can see that even some of the enclosure walls were demolished, and the large stones fell on the street that runs below the western wall, and also here along the southern wall.
Following the destruction of Herod's temple, Jews no longer have a sacred place to make their pilgrimages, nor an altar to offer sacrifices to their God. This condition of exile amplifies the Jewish diaspora now spreading throughout the world, like here on Djerba. Djerba, off the southeastern coast of Tunisia, is the legendary place of Homer's Odyssey, who describes it as the island of the Lotus Eaters. His hero, Ulysses, nearly loses some of his sailors who try and taste this noxious plant. Here, on this island, coexists myth and reality, alongside the sacred and profane. According to legend, the first Jews who arrive on Djerba in the 6th century BC are refugees fleeing the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. Their presence precedes the arrival of Islam by 1,000 years. Many of its inhabitants still speak a mixture of Hebrew, Arabic, Berber, and Aramaic. Today, on the largest island in North Africa, cohabits a population of 150,000 Muslims and 1,000 Jews. And by all outward appearances, look more or less like one another. However, some sew a black ribbon on the hem of their trousers, a symbol of mourning because of the destruction of the temple and their condition of exile. On this island, there are about 20 synagogues found in 2 villages, Haraskira and Hara Kabira, where the great synagogue of Djerba is located. Like many of the island's synagogues, they bear witness to a time when Jews were not allowed to build ostentatious places of worship. Dominique Jarasset is an historian of art and synagogue architecture, in particular, those found in Tunisia.
The specificity of the Great Synagogue of Djerba, from an architectural point of view in terms of construction, has very old structural design because it really takes its inspiration from that of a mosque. This shows how the Jews of Djerba but Jews in general, have this extraordinary ability to use the vernacular architecture of the local culture, to appropriate it, and then to reuse this within the framework of the Jewish ritual.
According to some interpretations, the rituals of the week can be symbolized by the Star of David with its 6 branches representing Jewish daily life, and at its center, the day of rest, Shabbat. In Judaism, this is the most sacred moment of the week. On Friday, with the appearance of the first star, and for 24 hours, the faithful take a ritual break from their daily lives and turn entirely towards the divine. The Word of God is transmitted via the Torah, which is carefully stored in the Holy Ark, just as the tablets of the law were held in the Holy of Holies. For the Shabbat ritual, worshippers are not allowed to make their way to synagogue other than by foot.
The village must be organized for the Sabbath in such a way that the faithful can go to the synagogue, live their lives during the entire duration of Shabbat, I would say as if they were in their own home. And here we still have in Hadaskera and Hadakabira an eruv. An eruv is a symbolic enclosure which can be created by a wall. It can be made of a simple wire, which surrounds the whole village, even including some houses, so that these houses can be inside the village, forming a symbolic enclosed space in order to comply with the ritual rules of Shabbat. And each of these synagogues is a bit of a marker inside this symbolic space.
All this takes place in order for the faithful to have easy access towards their place of prayer and to isolate them from the outside world.
The main principle of the Djerbian synagogue is that between the street and the interior space of the synagogue, you will always find a courtyard. It is a kind of contained space, often hidden with no facade. A space which is different from what is going on outside. It is a progressive entrance into the place which receives its holiness from the presence of the Torah.
In a synagogue, just like what existed in the temple, there are 2 important locations for the Torah. The Holy Ark, where it is stored, and the Teba, where it is placed to be read.
The reading of the Torah is conducted first and foremost among the faithful. Because of this, the Djerbians have invented a square-shaped design for reading, which is ideal. This configuration means that the Teba is in the center and all the faithful are around it, so that they can hear, of course, and above all, go up to the Teba, read, say a prayer. The result is a circulation of prayer and reading in the synagogue.
When the men take out the Torah from the Holy Ark, it is in shadow. When they bring it to the Teba, it is in the light. Some synagogues of Djerba possess an architectural peculiarity, the skylight. It is a well of light created by 12 windows located just above the reading table.
Djerbians have managed to bring together these valuable symbolic ideas, like the passage from shadow into the light, which also has a very practical dimension because it's easier to read from the Teba, lit from the skylights.
This architecture, which delivers light for the synagogues of Djerba, benefits all the faithful.
The synagogue is much more like a place of active participation, of readings, prayers, chants, than a place where one only watches, sitting on benches, and only helps with the worship. No, everyone participates.
The oldest synagogue on the island is in the Haraskira quarter. It is a synagogue of the Gripa. Built in the 6th century BC upon the arrival of the first Jews. Today, little remains of its original architecture.
In terms of architecture, if the building existed a very long time ago, one thing is certain. The building we see today is largely from the 19th century and even the 20th century. We know that the large main room, with these enormous skylights and all the arches, has only existed since 1940. Previously, the structure was exactly the same as the great synagogue in Hara Kabira, which is to say, 3 courtyards with arches, benches like these, where the faithful and the rabbis studied.
But this synagogue is not only a place of study and prayer. Its foundation is based on several intertwining legends, attracting pilgrims from all over the world.
After the destruction of the first Jerusalem temple, that's Solomon's temple, the Jews fled. Among them was a group of priests, and in Hebrew we call priests Kohanim. They carried with them relics from the temple, including a door. They managed to carry these relics from Jerusalem, cross the Mediterranean, and they arrived on the island. They found a secluded spot, and they buried the relics in the ground, and they built a synagogue on the relics. And that is the mythical origins of the Ghriba synagogue.
Ethnomusicologist Ruth Davis has focused her research on the Jewish music of Djerba, with a particular interest in songs related to the pilgrimage to this synagogue. The pilgrimage, which lasts 2 days in the spring, is not associated with the relics of the temple, but with another legend concerning a mysterious woman. Her name, the Griba.
She seemed very strange, and the people of the village were afraid of her. And one day they noticed her hut had burst into flames. And rather than coming to see what was going on, they actually stepped away, and they thought this might actually be something magical and sinister.
According to the legend, her house is completely consumed by fire, but the flames do not destroy her body. Both Jews and Muslims believe that a miracle has occurred. A myth is born. The Jews of Djerba built their synagogue on this mythical site. At the same time, a rumor spreads that this very place has miraculous healing powers.
There is a shrine to her in the synagogue, and that is the little grotto where you see the women coming, placing candles and eggs.
Jewish and Muslim pilgrims write inscriptions on eggs. Sometimes it is the name of a girl who wants to find a husband, have a baby, or hope for a miraculous cure. All find their way beneath the Holy Ark, which houses the sacred scrolls of the Torah. The eggs are then cooked by the warmth of the candles left here during the 2 days of the pilgrimage.
It always always had resonance for the Muslim inhabitants of Djerba. The cult of the grotto, of the laying of eggs, the fertility cult, was something that Muslims came for.
Throughout the duration of this yearly pilgrimage, the ritual separation between men and women disappears.
Women come and they can go wherever they please, and they use the synagogue as they wish. They come, they sit, they pray, they can go to any part of the synagogue. It's a complete contradiction of the normal practice.
This pilgrimage creates a social bond, similar to the one which once bound those who frequented the Temple of Jerusalem. The Synagogue of the Ghetto testifies to a faith held together from generation to generation.
The Ghetto pilgrimage is a great reunion place because it's when the Tunisian Jewish diaspora come and rejoin the small number of relatives that they have that are still living in Djerba. The pilgrimage becomes a time of reunion, or a time of return to roots, really. A return to the diasporic roots of these communities.
The tales of a strange woman, the Ghetto, and the high priests of the temple, the Kohanim, are mysteriously held together to create a direct link between Djerba and Jerusalem. Today, Jews and Muslims of Djerba continue to live side by side. There was a time when this coexistence was at the heart of an empire. The history of the Jewish people can be described as a succession of exoduses and exiles, leaving behind very few traces of their wanderings along the shores of the Mediterranean. In Spain, there is almost no pictorial representation of their synagogues, which could record their history. Here, there's scarcely a family tree going back a couple of generations. It's a hidden history. Arabs conquer southern Spain in the year 711, transforming this rugged Christian kingdom into their own for 700 years. They create paradise on earth, with elegant palaces, patios lined with orange trees, tempered by fountains. Creating the second largest city of the time after Constantinople, Cordoba. The Arab invasion seals the fate of the Jews of Sepharad, the ancient Hebrew word for Spain. The Jews will live here during one of the most flourishing periods in their history. It's thanks to the help of the Jews that the Muslims occupy the peninsula so swiftly in just 3 years of conquest. In return, the Jews are given positions of power. They gain wide respect in Islamic circles, and their culture prospers. To be Sepharad, for the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula, is synonymous of a way of life, calling Spain their home, their second Jerusalem. Over much of this time, Jews and Muslims coexist, enriching one another's lives and culture. This period, stretching from the 8th till the 14th century, will be known as Al-Andalus, the golden age of the Arab world in Andalusia.
The greatness of the city of Cordoba is linked to two communities, the Hispanic Muslims and our Sephardic Jewish community.
Sebastián de la Obra is a poet and writer. He is the director of a museum of Jewish culture of Spain, Casa Sepharad.
Between the 9th and 10th centuries, there's no other city in Europe where Jews play such an important role, which was not without consequences. Because the courtiers, the rich of Cordoba were Jewish, the intellectuals of Cordoba were Jewish, the best doctors, the translators, the diplomats, all were here in Cordoba.
It was all too good to last. After centuries under Arab rule, the Catholics retake the reins of power. This period is called the Reconquista. And in time, they will reign over almost the entire Iberian Peninsula.
The Cordoba of 1315 is a city which lost the memory of its greatness. And our Jewish community was a decaying community, which had to be discreet.
During this period, the church insisted on the destruction of the great synagogue of Cordoba.
There was an order from the Bishop of Cordoba stating that it was forbidden for synagogues to go beyond the height of the smallest church in the city. There were therefore two options: cut the tops off of the synagogues or destroy them. They were destroyed.
For 5 centuries, no sound of Hebrew chants would resonate between the walls of this Andalusian city.
This small synagogue will not be discovered until the 19th century. During a storm, it was a terrible, devastating storm. The roof, in bad condition, caused a leak, which turned into a flood. This place had been a chapel, a hermitage, a small hospital. It was even the seat of the Shoemakers Guild. On this particular night of rain and thunderstorms, the water got into the stucco, causing the plaster to become loose, revealing underneath elements which were not part of this chapel. And then, in 1884, this edifice ceases being a place of forgotten memory and reclaims itself for what it once was. They discover that it is a synagogue of Cordoba.
The hidden synagogue of Cordoba is located in the Jewish quarter known as the Juderia. It is the only surviving synagogue in this city.
The first name given to this synagogue and written in Hebrew on the walls were the words miniature sanctuary, which means that the builder of this synagogue knew that he was building a tiny container, a precious jewel box in miniature, which did not correspond to the wishes of the community, nor signify its importance.
Despite its construction during the Christian era, the decor of this synagogue is Moorish with the use of plasterwork called mudahar. It is probably the work of Muslim craftsmen. It shares an undeniable decorative heritage with mosques of the time. This style of decor is at the crossroads of Jewish and Muslim cultures.
This synagogue is the most beautiful on the peninsula. Because in the foundation of Jewish tradition, harmony, perfection, balance, and proportion are qualities associated with God.
The second chapter of the history of Sepharad opens here in the Christian capital of Castile, Toledo. In the Middle Ages, it is one of the most important cities of Spain. The Jewish community was established in Toledo in the 3rd century. But not until the 14th century did it achieve a brief period of prosperity. Here, there exists one of the most ancient and largest surviving synagogues of this period. Now a museum, but once a living witness to history. Garrido is an historian conducting research on Jewish art from the Iberian Peninsula during the Middle Ages.
If this synagogue is particularly tall in comparison with other synagogues, it is because its founder, Samuel Halevi, was the treasurer to Peter I, King of Castile. Samuel Halevi was the most influential Jew of Castile in the 14th century and a prominent politician. He was able to obtain a special authorization from the king to build this synagogue, which exceeded the height allowed at that time.
Samuel Halevi, by virtue of his privileged status, is the very symbol of the social success of certain Jews on the Iberian Peninsula during the Christian era. At the time, the synagogue bears his name. Today, it is one of the finest examples of mudahar craftsmanship in the whole of Spain. During construction, Samuel Halevi is particularly attentive to the decoration of the eastern wall of his synagogue, where the Torah is traditionally held in accordance with the Jewish religious tradition, which dictates that the Holy Ark must be oriented towards Jerusalem.
The Holy Ark is the most decorated surface in the synagogue, but also the area which is the most sacred, because it houses the scrolls of the Torah, where prayer is directed. It can be symbolically described as a window looking out towards Jerusalem. In the Jewish tradition, Jerusalem is the highest place on earth, the place closest to the sky, and the word Jerusalem itself is a plural in Hebrew. It has the ending ayim, as in Jerusalem. This has been interpreted as the existence of two Jerusalems, a heavenly Jerusalem and an earthly Jerusalem. Jerusalem is therefore a link between the heavenly world and the earthly one. This gives us the key to understanding that there are two levels of decor in the synagogue. One, which represents the earthly world, and the other, the celestial world, represented by the ceiling adorned with stars.
Samuel Halevi not only creates on the walls of his synagogue intertwined representations of the earth with its lush vegetation, but also shows his allegiance to the king with the royal crest. But the times are changing for Halevi. His king, Pedro of Castile, has him imprisoned, tortured, and finally killed. The wind begins to turn against the Sephardics. Final chapter.
Towards the end of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th century, there was an important anti-Jewish movement on the Iberian Peninsula. It was led by the clergy who preached against the Jews. The Jewish neighborhood of Toledo was targeted and attacked during this period of hostility. Most of the synagogues were burnt to the ground, and furthermore, many Jews were put to death or forced to convert. The slogan of the time was, "Baptism or death."
In 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who reign over the whole of Spain, expel from their kingdom 200,000 Sephardics, who depart south towards Africa, but also to lands across the Mediterranean basin. Some even wander to Northern Europe.
The Sephardic Jewish tradition is deeply rooted in the story, still told, which says that when the Jews left Spain, they took with them the keys to their homes, always hoping to come back one day, open the door of their house, and to live here once again.
This once thriving place of Jewish life, whose cultural effervescence deserves the title of the Golden Age of Sepharad, disappears from the Iberian Peninsula. Jews will never return with keys in hand to reclaim their property and possessions. (1675). The city of Amsterdam is flourishing. Ships return from all four corners, filled with extravagant luxuries. A prospering population, artistically and intellectually. A place of refuge is offered for the many fleeing persecution. Since their expulsion from Spain and Portugal, some members of the Sephardic community settle here with abiding confidence and prosper.
The Sephardic community that came to Amsterdam, to the Dutch Republic, consisted of refugees from the Iberian Peninsula.
Joel Cohen is an historian. He was director of the Jewish Museum, founder of the National Museum of the Shoah, and the Jewish Quarter of Amsterdam.
The Sephardic Jews came to the Dutch Republic, a republic at war with Spain since 1568.
Here in Amsterdam, Jews are more or less accepted. They are finally able to exercise their trades and practice their religion freely without being seen as a form of pestilence. In this climate of acceptance, they become convinced that their God-chosen Messiah, who will save them, has arrived.
And in the middle of the 17th century, there rose a man in Izmir, Sabbatai Tzvi, who was proclaimed to be the Messiah. At the time, he had many followers, which led to big discussions between the rabbis. But he was revealed as being not the Messiah, which was in the end of the 1660s, and the leaders of the community to come to this decision that since we are not going to Jerusalem with the Messiah and rebuild the temple, we'll build it right here in Amsterdam. The decision was taken to build this synagogue. So we are in the middle of the golden century. So the architecture is the golden age. It's Calvinism. It's grandeur, grandiosity.
75 years after their arrival, the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula buy at great expense from the citizens of this Dutch city a plot of land surrounded by swampy marshlands. Their goal? To build the most beautiful, the most splendid of synagogues ever. But in order to do so, they must find someone who is able to transform this abandoned, fetid parcel of land into a viable construction site for their sacred place. Despite the many freedoms granted to Jews, they cannot join the guilds of Amsterdam, both those associated with architecture and with construction. So a competition is therefore announced, but only non-Jews can apply. It's Elias Bouman, a renowned architect of the time, who wins the competition by presenting a plan inspired by the Temple of Jerusalem.
In Jewish tradition, the laws of the temple, which were the sacred places of Judaism, the laws of the temple, the exile of the Jewish people, it's symbolized in each synagogue built anywhere, but also here.
Miriam Notter is an historian of art and curator of the Jewish Museum and also of the Portuguese Synagogue of Amsterdam.
For this particular synagogue, the architect, Elias Bouman, was inspired by engravings and scale models of the temple that were circulating here in Amsterdam at that time. And this inspired him in the design that he delivered as part of the competition of architects who made designs for the synagogue.
4 years after the competition, here stands, proud on her reclaimed island, one of the largest synagogues in the world, the Synagogue. Like all other buildings in Amsterdam, it is supported by piles buried in water, a technique dating back to the birth of the city in the 13th century. The ingenuity of Elias Bouman is to have created out of this swampland a monumental building. In order to shore up its foundations, he uses 3,000 timber piles driven into the water at least 12 meters deep. And with a height of nearly 20 meters, the building dominates the cityscape.
This was the largest synagogue in Europe. This was their aim. They really wanted to show how they grew as a wealthy Jewish community settled in the main town, Amsterdam, in the Golden Age. So I think the whole building was symbolizing their new status as Dutch Sephardi Jews.
A symbol of integration for the Jewish people in their adoptive city, all of Amsterdam is there to celebrate at the grand opening ceremonies on the day of its inauguration. This event is immortalized by contemporary artists, sealing the link between the Jewish community and authorities of the Dutch capital.
The date was a very carefully chosen, which is the day that all Jewish communities commemorate the destruction of the temples of Jerusalem. It's a day of mourning, of fasting, remembering the Jewish people lost the temples of Jerusalem, that they lost their home, that they live in exile.
During the 7 days of ceremonies, 7 rabbis follow one after another with sermons and blessings of the synagogue. For the Sephardic Jewish community, the synagogue, by virtue of certain architectural features, becomes a direct link to the lost temple. Inside, it is the Ark which houses the Torah. And on the outside, the buttresses.
It's the outside supporting beams, which you see on drawings of the temple. And inside, this is a synagogue.
In his architectural plan for the synagogue, Elias Bouman designs a separate floor for the women. He is aware of the Jewish tradition, which suggests that men and women be separated.
When they built this synagogue, they were able to create very wide spaces for the women.
The two women's galleries, with their 400 seats, are supported by 12 columns which represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Downstairs, 1,200 men can take part in the service.
It's a typical Sephardi way of sitting. That you sit like this and you have the place of reading and praying at the Teba. And when someone reads the Torah in the authentic way they read it here, it's an experience.
In front of the Teba, the imposing Holy Ark, the one and the same since its installation. Covering almost the entire eastern wall. It possesses 5 doors, containing 30 Torahs. When a Torah is brought out to be read, the whole congregation rises. During the Golden Age, there are no expenses spared by the Sephardic community on their synagogue. The silver ornaments which adorn the scrolls of the Torah. The precious wood from Brazil for the Holy Ark, with the delicate carvings on its pediments and the gold leaf letters displaying the 10 Commandments inscribed on the tablets of the law. The very best craftsmen of the time are hired to create this sacred ark.
I think the whole building was symbolizing their new status as Dutch Sephardi Jews and showing their presence in the city landscape was part of what they had been working for, to start new Jewish life in exile in the Netherlands. Always with the notion and awareness that it's temporary, that's exile, because of course, in the end, everything is commemorating the temple in Jerusalem. And so it's this dual function. It's a permanent, temporary home.
Venice, the Serenissima. Like many European cities, it welcomes Jews from the diaspora. Venetian merchants have traded with Jews since the 11th century, never allowing them to settle here. All will change in the spring of 1516. Those governing Venice, under the leadership of the Doge, grant the Jews permanent residence. They are offered a place to live, an industrial island which had been used as the copper foundry of the city. The first to arrive are from Germany. They are the Ashkenazi, meaning German in Hebrew. They are quickly joined by the Sephardics from the Iberian Peninsula, the Jews of Italy, followed by those from the south of France and those coming from the Ottoman Empire. Out of this cosmopolitan explosion, 5 synagogues will emerge, representing each diaspora. The Scola Tedesca, the Scola Canton, the Scola Italiana, the Scola Levantina, and the Scola Spagnola. They will become the sacred places of the Ghetto.
The name Ghetto was, in Venetian dialect, a reference on the foundry of copper, which was placed here in this area as a place for the Jews.
Donatella Calabi is an historian specializing in urban architecture. She has published numerous books on the Venetian ghetto.
This word gettare means in Italian, in Venetian, throw away. They threw away the rest of the copper in this area, in the middle of the square, and the place was called, for this reason, Ghetto. It became ghetto when the German Jews were forced to live here, and they couldn't speak ghetto as the Venetian did, so it became ghetto.
In the 16th century, as in the rest of Europe, the Jews of the ghetto are subject to certain restrictive laws. By nightfall, they must return to their island. Christian guards lock the gates of both entrances and stand watch. 2 patrol boats do the rounds. At dawn, when the bells of St. Mark toll, the guards open the gates of the ghetto. During the day, when Jews enter the city, they must wear badges and clothes identifying them as Jews. Despite being under strict surveillance, the ghetto population continues to grow. From 700 Jews at the time of its creation, it expands to 3,000 in less than 100 years. There is no choice but to adapt the buildings in order to make room for more people.
The ghetto was a place of buildings of 1 or 2 floors, not more. But very quickly they had to build on top to receive more people. And it was necessary to fragment in the interior the buildings into more flats.
They add additional floors, making more space to accommodate this burgeoning population. They also create places of worship. Some of Venice's tallest buildings can still be found here in the ghetto.
I don't think that you can speak about Jewish architecture. If you think that in 16th century, the Renaissance is the moment where the architecture is more monumental, more emphatic, in the sacred places more than elsewhere, the attitude of the Jewish population was not to be too visible. The synagogue of the ghetto, at the exterior, they are completely hidden. You don't have any monumental emphasis on their architecture. The only element that you can see from outside are the windows, the large windows, or the skylights.
In the synagogues of the ghetto, in order to read the Holy Book, as much light as possible is needed. This is one of the reasons why synagogues are positioned on the upper floors of the ghetto buildings.
This is a choice given to different reasons. One is religious, being near to the sky, near to God. The other one is the light, the possibility to take light directly from the sky. The Canton is one of the most effective and more impressive synagogue, which is why it was important to have natural light.
This synagogue is lavishly decorated. On 3 of its 4 walls, a series of 8 biblical scenes are represented. Over the centuries, the Scola Canton was restored several times. Historians believe that Christian craftsmen are responsible for the creation of these pictorial scenes. Around the corner from the Scola Canton, the Scola Tedesca, the oldest synagogue of the Ghetto, paid for by the Jews of Central Europe, the first to arrive.
The German synagogue was built in a very narrow building, narrow and restricted between the square and the canal. These spaces are not really geometrically correct. They are not perfect rectangular.
2 centuries after it was initially constructed, an oval balustrade is added to the women's gallery in order to give an illusion of a rectangular space. To accentuate this effect, the fresco painted on the ceiling also takes on the shape of the oval balustrade. This decor was inspired by the theaters of the time. It illustrates the affinity which develops between the Jewish community and Venetian society. The walls of the synagogue are painted to imitate marble because Ashkenazi Jews, who are the ghetto moneylenders and second-hand dealers, do not have the resources to buy real marble. In addition, the Catholic Church declares that this stone is too precious for Jews to use to decorate their places of worship.
The ghetto was a very cosmopolitan place. So a lot of different people having different behavior, different cultural attitude, different languages, completely different languages. They even didn't understand each other. So the synagogue is the place where they can find their own origin and their own culture.
In 1575, the Italian Jews, who are the poorest of the ghetto, build the most modest of all the synagogues, the Scola Italiana. With far less ornamentation, it is also the smallest, accommodating only 25 worshippers. Like all the other synagogues, it is probably built by Christians, because in Italy, as in all Europe, Jews are prohibited from working in construction.
It's a very old decorated way. It's more simple, more equilibrated than the others. The others are very often over-decorated.
The Jewish community is expanding. 25 years after the creation of the Ghetto Nuovo, the city of Venice allots to the ghetto Jews a new parcel of land, the Ghetto Vecchio. Jews from the Ottoman Empire are the wealthiest. They establish their own synagogue within this new quarter. The scale of the Scola Leventina testifies to their status. It is not found on the upper floors of apartment buildings, but it is completely autonomous. Still, in order not to draw attention to this community, the exterior facade is anonymous and discreet. However, the interior affirms their freedom to express their faith with flamboyant and confident decor.
In the interior is the only possibility for Jews and their sacred places was to decorate them. You had some similarities in the interior decoration and certainly relationships to the building of churches at the same period. After all, the architects and the builders and so on were the same. So very often this kind of decoration is quite similar to the interior the decoration of some churches.
The Ark, made out of sculpted marble, is a refined example of Venetian architecture of the time. Carved during the 17th century, it is probably the work of the studio of architect Baldassare Longhena, creator of one of the most beautiful Baroque churches of Venice, Santa Maria della Salute. These sacred places are not only dedicated to prayer, they are also places of study and education. The Scuola Levantina is no exception. Religion is taught here. For this reason, they are all called scuola, which in Venetian dialect means school. The largest synagogue of the Venetian ghetto faces the Scuola Levantina. It is the Scuola Spagnola. As in all the ghetto synagogues, this is a living sacred place. The main ritual holidays and daily prayer services are celebrated here among the 17th century Baroque decor. Historians also attribute the restoration of the interior of the Scuola Spagnola to the workshop of Baldassare Longhena.
Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
"250 years later, in 1797, life for the ghetto Jews changes with the conquest of Venice by Napoleon Bonaparte. He orders their emancipation and the destruction of the ghetto gates. At last, the Jews are free to leave their ghetto to settle in other districts of Venice where they enter political and civic life and become, at least for a brief moment, Venetians among Venetians. In the first half of the 19th century, a carved headstone is found. Inscribed, a relief of a woman, a man, and a little boy. Embellished with a 7-branched candelabra reminiscent of the ones from the Temple of Jerusalem. It dates from the 3rd century. It is a Jewish tombstone. Discovered not far from Budapest, where one of the first Jewish communities of Europe would have been established. Jews first arrive as slaves for the Roman conquerors. They will become their soldiers. They are free to own land, to start families, to build, to pray, and bury their dead. By the 11th century, with the expansion of Christianity, they lose most of these freedoms and are forced, as in Venice, to work in commerce and moneylending. In the 19th century, with the industrial expansion of Budapest, the Jewish community successfully becomes integrated into the world of finance, politics, and culture. A branch of the Ashkenazi community of Hungary builds an emblematic sacred place, the Great Synagogue of Budapest, the Doheny. Inaugurated in 1859, it can accommodate more than 3,000 faithful. It is then the largest synagogue in the world.
The dohány represents the elite. So these were the emancipated and reformed Jews.
Rudolf Klein is an expert on the history of Central European Jews and the architecture of Hungarian synagogues, particularly those of Budapest.
The Gentile society liked the Jews to be distinguishable, at least in terms of architectural language.
The Jewish community finds itself torn between the idea of integration and that of not wanting to offend their non-Jewish neighbors. They commissioned Ludwig Forster, a renowned Viennese architect, to build a sacred place which combines their desire for integration while affirming their religion.
So the facade on the front was the statement, the Oriental statement. And the back facade for the Jewish community, it's much more modest. So it shows that the Jewish community had two faces. One was a face that they showed to the Gentiles, that the Gentiles were expecting to behave, the Jews. And the other was among us. And this intimate design was very far from any architectural statement. So the synagogue is a hybrid in terms of architectural language.
Forster adds two towers capped with Byzantine bulbs, giving an Orientalist touch to the design so as not to confuse it with a church. He adds a nod to history by claiming that this architectural detail is part of the Temple of Solomon.
This Oriental style was the distinguishing element, and the basic idea was the Jews are the Orientals of Europe.
As a result of disagreements, architect Forster leaves the project once the exterior of the building is completed. He is replaced by the Hungarian architect Frigyes Fezel, who finishes the interior space and decor. Frescoes, ceilings, and stained glass windows.
The space, which is practically a Christian church, longitudinal space, huge, which is very far from the Jewish tradition with the central space and intimacy. But this building is Jewish because it differs from the Gentile buildings in terms of its synagogue architecture.
Frigyes Fezel also designs and sculpts the massive ark. As well as the overhead ornamental lamp, which contains the perpetual light, Ner Tamid. This light, permanently lit in all synagogues, evokes the large candelabra at the temple in Jerusalem, symbolizing the presence of God in the synagogue.
This was absolutely state-of-the-art, mid-19th century, a modern cast iron structure. The pillars are made of cast iron, and it is important to say that the first fully cast iron structure was built in London in 1851, and this building was built 3 years later. So in such a short period, Jews adopted state-of-the-art modern structure, modern technology. They wanted to state with that they are for modernization.
The Jews of Budapest do not just want to show their civic pride by commissioning a monumental place of worship. They also wish to convey the following message. We are here to embrace progress, technology, and the future. These concepts are integrated into the design plan of the synagogue.
The bima is traditionally a reading desk. Now here it is a mechanism which changes its shape. You push a button and it operates on itself. You know, traditionally Jews were waiting for the Messiah. And during 19th century, many Jews have mistaken modernity for the Messiah. So they saw in it a relief from all this suffering during the past, discrimination, persecution, modernity that, due to technology, will liberate all mankind.
The synagogue by architectural design, along with the use of technology, is a symbol of their newly found freedom of speech and their modern way of worship. After the reading of the Torah, rabbis ascend the pulpit to deliver their sermons.
And in the 19th century, as Jews became part of the Gentile society, at least in economic terms, they needed the pulpits that described the political situation, what to do, anti-Semitism, how to fight it. So the service got secular elements and an architectural statement different from the Ark and the Bima. They were very optimistic, enlightenment, emancipation, and then it was all broken during the Holocaust, and it was really a big matter in Jewish history, and Jews lost the faith. So everything what is post-Holocaust is different from what has been before. Half of the Hungarian Jews perished. So everybody had an uncle. All my grandparents perished in the Holocaust. So we feel somehow uncomfortable. All this optimism that is shown here, it's an overstatement for us. It's a historic overstatement that we understand our great-grandfathers, but see that they were over-optimistic, and all this advance and emancipation was very relative, and it was not the final outcome. It was a phase in Jewish history which is really changing fast and profoundly.
The optimism of the Jews of Budapest will not last. The Nazis annihilate the synagogues of Europe, just as they do with the Jewish people. Only a very few exceptions will escape this systematic destruction. Throughout the turbulent history of Europe's Jews, many from the diaspora will make the crossing over the Atlantic. During the interwar years, the American Jewish community becomes the largest in the world. The United States is their place of refuge and freedom. In this land of welcome, an unlikely encounter takes place between a renowned architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, and a rabbi, Mortimer Cohen. Together, in the suburbs of Philadelphia, at Elkins Park, they design a sacred place which redefines the architecture of synagogues.
Wright worked very closely with the rabbi, and it's one of the few buildings he did that he acknowledged the client as an equal co-collaborator in its creation.
30 years ago, Alexander Gorlin, while still a student of architecture, was transformed by this iconic synagogue. It continues to inspire him and his work.
Walking in, I was completely blown away by the power of the space and the evocative nature of it, the light and the tilted planes of the floor, which was something that was extraordinary.
Frank Lloyd Wright, who is not Jewish, had designed many churches, but never a synagogue. Rabbi Mortimer Cohen asks Wright to create a building which marries the American spirit with that of the original spirit of Judaism.
Judaism is more about the text and the word and the idea than the form. And so, because of the destruction of the temple and the loss of Israel as the location of the locus of the Jewish people, the Bible and its interpretations became the heart of the religion. So it's one of the few religions in which the absence of the original center is at the heart of the space.
Although all synagogues use as reference the temples of Jerusalem, Wright and Cohen are aware of the lack of real thought behind these designs. Together, they will remedy this situation. Frank Lloyd Wright writes of their collaboration. "You provided me with the ideas, and I tried to put them into architectural form." Cohen finds inspiration from the early history of his people, who first performed their religious rites in a tent with a portable ark containing the sacred tablets. He wants to recreate what he calls a Mount Sinai of glass.
The concept of the building as a Mount Sinai of glass was the explicit program that the rabbi gave to Wright. This is a vessel of light. It's suffused with light. You're within a space of light. As Frank Lloyd Wright said, the space is the reality, not the container. So in this space, you sense that you are part of light, that you are created of light. And I think that kind of identity of the experience with light is what makes this unique.
On November 14, 1954, Frank Lloyd Wright and Mortimer Cohen break ground for the future site of their synagogue, Beth Shalom, meaning House of Peace in Hebrew. For Wright, it will be his last project. He will never see it completed. He dies a few months before its inauguration in 1959.
Wright's idea of organic architecture was that every detail would imply the whole and vice versa. So it's a kind of microcosm of design. So sometimes he would even start with a geometric shape that would be the entire plan, but also the details of the ornament inside. This space specifically, the motifs you see, the triangular motifs along the edge of the beams, reiterate the idea of the triangle facets of the pyramid, which is also the plan itself. It's a kind of modified hexagon of overlapping triangles that recall the Jewish star, but is never literal. Wright, the genius that he was able to translate Judaic concepts in a way that has never been seen before, really, such as in this space.
Rabbi Cohen shows Wright photographs of the wooden pyramidal synagogue of Gowczek in Poland. It is emblematic of a style of synagogues which were destroyed during the Second World War. This building inspires Wright in creating his American synagogue. It references Jewish imagery alongside those from Wright's own culture. On a structure made of concrete, glass, and steel, 30 meters in height, he adds 3 aluminum menorahs whose 7 branched holders symbolize the Jerusalem temple.
Well, I see layers of meaning in the space. So that it's industrial, but at the same time, you have a lot of Art Deco motifs. These triangulated forms that Wright used allude to not only American Indian motifs of headdresses and kind of stylized shapes. So it's a layered experience of industrial, religious, Judaic, deco. It's a very rich experience at this point.
Wright does not want stained glass windows in the synagogue. Instead, he designs a triangular-shaped chandelier of colored plexiglass, which is the centerpiece of the sanctuary space. He names it the Basket of Light. And for each color, he references ancient Jewish mysticism. Red, strength and courage. Green, insight. Blue, wisdom. Yellow, beauty. White, compassion.
It evokes God's presence in the shape of the triangle that is the simplest distillation of the plan of the entire synagogue.
For Wright, the experience of the space does not stop with the decor of the building.
You feel contained within this building, as Wright said, within the hands of God. And in fact, he overlaid the plan of the building over the rabbi's hands, which is unique in the presentation of all his work. He tilts the planes of the floor so that you feel a sense of center, which is then picked up by the great axis of the roof. So you have this kind of vertical axis mundi, the axis of the world, from connecting earth to heaven. And then also horizontally, you feel a containment around you so that you feel a sense of communality with your fellow worshipers.
For the 1,000 worshipers seated together in the sanctuary, Wright and Cohen want to forge, in the design plan, a sense of the story of the Jewish people. The sand color of the carpet recalls the 40 years of wandering in the Sinai desert.
The arrangements of the seats lends itself to the original idea of the synagogue as a place of assembly. So together, we pray as a group rather than individually.
Rabbi Mortimer Cohen wishes his synagogue to be open to modernity and equality. Together, women and men of the Beth Shalom community pray and study the sacred texts here in this House of Peace. The architectural dream of a rabbi and one of the greatest architects of his time gives rise to a new language for sacred space.
Sacred space is about a feeling of otherworldliness, of a space that takes you out of yourself and into another realm, a connection beyond the individual to the divine.
Throughout history, millions of Jews lost their lives because of their religion, and many Jewish communities no longer exist. Their synagogues should have disappeared as well, but they did not. If synagogues could speak, they would say what they have always been: buildings that assemble, transmit, and connect. These buildings are humble enough to know that the sacred is found not in their architecture, but in the text of the sacred book, which they have protected for thousands of years.